Your Honor, with all due respect, and I mean this, one phone call from my office, and your judicial career is finished. The words hung in the courtroom like a guillotine blade. Attorney Marcus Whitfield stood at the defense table in his $3,000 suit, his Rolex catching the fluorescent lights as he pointed a manicured finger toward the bench. His jaw was set, his eyes burning with the kind of confidence that came from 20 years of never losing and never being told no. Judge Frank Caprio looked up from the case file, his reading glasses perched on his nose. The 78-year-old jurist had seen thousands of cases in his decades on the bench, but this particular moment made even the court stenographer stop typing. The bailiff's hand instinctively moved closer to his side. 20 people in the gallery held their collective breath. "Mr. Whitfield," Judge Caprio said softly, removing his glasses with deliberate care. "Did you just threaten this court?" "Threaten?" Whitfield let out a sharp laugh. "Your Honor, I don't make threats. I make phone calls. There's a difference. My client is Victor Castellano. Perhaps you've heard of Castellano Development? They've donated generously to this city. Very generously. They have friends in the State House, the Governor's Mansion, and yes, on the Judicial Review Board." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Caprio raised his hand, and silence returned instantly, a testament to the respect he commanded without ever raising his voice. But what had brought them to this explosive moment? The morning had started like any other Tuesday in Providence Municipal Court. Judge Caprio settled into his chair, straightening the small American flag on his desk, a ritual he'd performed every morning for 43 years. The docket showed 18 cases, mostly traffic violations and permit disputes. Nothing unusual. Case number 12 caught his attention. City of Providence versus Castellano Development Corp. The charge was operating a construction site without proper permits, causing a partial sidewalk collapse that had injured an elderly woman, Mrs. Rosa Martinez, who had been walking to church. "Bailiff, call case number 12, Judge Caprio said. The doors opened, and in walked Marcus Whitfield. 6'2", silver temples, a smile that had charmed juries in 6 states. Behind him rolled a literal wheelie cart stacked with legal binders and a slim associate who looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Marcus Whitfield for the defense, Your Honor. I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but we've prepared extensive documentation that will demonstrate this entire case is a municipal overreach bordering on harassment." Judge Caprio folded his hands. "Mr. Whitfield, before we begin, I want to clarify something. This case involves an injured citizen, Mrs. Martinez, who is 73 years old and spent 2 weeks in the hospital with a fractured hip. This isn't about documentation. This is about accountability." Whitfield's smile never wavered. "Of course, Your Honor. And my client deeply regrets Mrs. Martinez's accident, which is why we're prepared to offer her a settlement, a very generous settlement, to resolve this matter privately." "That's not how this works, Counselor." "Your Honor, this is a criminal proceeding, not a civil suit. Your client is charged with 16 municipal violations, including criminal negligence. Mrs. Martinez's injuries are documented. The site inspector's report shows your client ignored 3 separate stop work orders. What exactly do you think you're here to negotiate?" For the first time, Whitfield's smile faltered. Just a flicker, but Judge Caprio saw it. "Your Honor, perhaps you're not aware of the economic impact Castellano Development has on this city. They employ 300 union workers. They've invested $40 million in the waterfront revitalization project. The mayor himself cut the ribbon at their last—" "Mr. Whitfield." Judge Caprio's voice was still gentle, but there was steel underneath. "I don't care if your client built the Sistine Chapel. They violated the law. They ignored safety orders. And a woman got hurt." That's when Whitfield's expression changed. The practiced charm evaporated, replaced by something harder, colder. "Your Honor, I think we need to have a realistic conversation about how this case proceeds." What came next would shock everyone in the room. "Let me be frank. Whitfield continued, stepping closer to the bench, closer than protocol allowed. My client has relationships, powerful relationships, the kind that can make or break a judge's career. Now, I'm not suggesting anything improper, but I am saying that a little judicial discretion here would be appreciated and remembered. The assistant district attorney shot to her feet. Your Honor, this is completely inappropriate. I'll handle this, Ms. Chen, Judge Caprio said quietly. He turned his full attention to Whitfield. Counselor, are you attempting to intimidate this court? Intimidate? Whitfield spread his hands innocently. I'm simply making you aware of the reality of the situation. Your Honor, you're what, 77? 78? You've had a good run, a very respectable career. It would be a shame to see it end badly over something as trivial as a permit violation. The courtroom gasped. Even Whitfield's own associate looked horrified. Mr. Whitfield, Judge Caprio said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, I want to make sure I understand you correctly. Are you suggesting that I dismiss these charges or face professional consequences? I'm suggesting that smart people know when to be flexible. Your Honor, one phone call from Victor Castellano's office reaches the Attorney General. Another call reaches the Governor. A third call reaches the Judicial Oversight Committee. You're appointed, not elected. You serve at the pleasure of people who value economic development over bureaucratic nitpicking. The bailiff stepped forward. Judge, should I? No. Judge Caprio raised his hand again. His face was calm, almost serene, but those who knew him recognized the look. It was the same expression he wore when dealing with the worst kinds of people, not with anger, but with profound disappointment in what human beings were capable of. Mr. Whitfield, I've been on this bench for 43 years. In that time, I've seen talented lawyers, honest lawyers, brilliant lawyers. I've also seen lawyers who forgot what they were supposed to be. Your Honor, I don't need a lecture on legal ethics. But you're going to get one anyway, Judge Caprio continued, his voice still soft but filling every corner of the courtroom. Because somewhere between law school and that expensive suit, you forgot something crucial. Whitfield rolled his eyes. And what's that, Your Honor? The sanctity of justice? The nobility of the law? Please. What Judge Caprio said next would go viral within hours. Judge Caprio stood up slowly from his chair. It was a rare gesture. He usually conducted proceedings seated, and it commanded instant attention. At 78 years old, he wasn't imposing in stature, but his presence filled the room. Mr. Whitfield, let me tell you a story. In 1981, I was a young municipal court judge. I'd been appointed just 6 months earlier. A case came before me. A developer, not unlike your client, who'd built an apartment complex with faulty wiring. There was a fire. A child died. The courtroom was absolutely silent. The developer's lawyer came to me. He was connected, powerful, smooth. He suggested that maybe the fire was the tenant's fault. Faulty space heater, something like that. He suggested that ruling against his client would be bad for the city, bad for development, bad for me. He had friends, he said. Friends who could help my career. Or hurt it. Whitfield's face was unreadable, but his associate was staring at the floor. Do you know what I did, Mr. Whitfield? I assume you ruled against him, given that you're telling this story. I found his client guilty of criminal negligence and recommended the maximum penalty. The lawyer made his phone calls to the mayor, to city councilors, to the state party chairman. They all called me. Some politely suggested I reconsider. Others were less polite. One councilman told me I'd never sit on a higher bench. He was probably right about that. Judge Caprio walked around from behind the bench, another unprecedented move that had the bailiff on high alert. But here's what that lawyer, and what you, seem to have forgotten. The law isn't made in phone calls and backroom deals. It's not made by developers or donors or politicians. The law is made here, in courtrooms, by judges and juries who look at evidence and make decisions based on truth, not convenience. Your Honor, that's very idealistic, but I'm not finished, Counselor. There was no anger in Judge Caprio's voice, but the authority was absolute. You asked me if I know who Victor Castellano is. I do. He's a very successful man, a very wealthy man, and right now he's also a defendant in my courtroom, which means here, in this moment, he's equal to every other person who's ever stood where you're standing. Whitfield opened his mouth to respond, but Judge Caprio continued. You threatened my career. You suggested I should be afraid of phone calls. Let me tell you what I'm actually afraid of, Mr. Whitfield. I'm afraid of looking at myself in the mirror and seeing someone who bent the law because it was convenient. I'm afraid of becoming the kind of judge who values his position more than his principles. I'm afraid of forgetting that Mrs. Rosa Martinez, who's sitting right there in the back row, matters just as much as your billionaire client. Every head turned. There, in the last row, sat an elderly woman with silver hair pulled back in a bun, wearing a simple floral dress and leaning on a cane. Her eyes were wet with tears. The shift in the room was palpable. Whitfield glanced back at Mrs. Martinez, and for the first time his composure cracked. Your Honor, I wasn't aware Mrs. Martinez would be present. This is highly irregular. Irregular? She's the victim. She has every right to be here. Unlike you, Counselor, I believe people should see justice being served. Your Honor, I misspoke earlier. I was simply trying to provide context about my client's importance to the community. No. Judge Caprio's voice was firm now. You didn't misspeak. You threatened. You attempted to leverage your client's wealth and connections to influence my ruling. That's not advocacy, Mr. Whitfield. That's corruption. The ADA was furiously taking notes. Whitfield's associate had gone pale. I want to make something very clear, Judge Caprio continued, returning to the bench. I don't care who your client knows. I don't care how many ribbons he's cut or how many fundraisers he's attended. In this courtroom, the law applies equally. A construction company that ignores safety orders and injures someone doesn't get a pass because they're economically important. That's not how justice works. Whitfield tried a different approach, his voice suddenly conciliatory. Your Honor, perhaps we got off on the wrong foot. I apologize if my comments were misconstrued. I have the utmost respect for this court. All I'm asking is that you consider the totality of the circumstances. My client has already implemented new safety protocols. They've hired a new site manager. They're committed to being held accountable, Judge Caprio finished. Good. Then they won't object to my ruling. Your Honor, if I could just... Mr. Whitfield, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to review all 16 charges against your client. I'm going to examine the evidence, and I'm going to make a ruling based on the facts and the law. Not on who your client plays golf with, not on how much money they've donated, and certainly not on your thinly veiled threats. Whitfield's jaw tightened. Your Honor, I must object to the characterization of my comments as threats. Objection noted and overruled. Now let's discuss the actual case. Ms. Chen, please present the city's evidence. But Whitfield wasn't done yet, and what he said next would seal his fate. Your Honor, before Ms. Chen proceeds, I need to place something on the record. Whitfield's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. The charm was completely gone now, replaced by naked arrogance. I want it noted that this court has displayed clear bias against my client from the outset of these proceedings. Judge Caprio looked at him steadily. On what basis? On the basis that you've refused to consider the broader economic impact of this case. On the basis that you've allowed the alleged victim to sit in the courtroom in a clear attempt to prejudice the proceedings emotionally. And on the basis of your comments about my client's wealth and connections, which suggest a pre-existing animus toward successful defendants. The ADA looked like she wanted to jump over the table. Your Honor, this is absurd. Ms. Chen. Judge Caprio's single word was enough. He never broke eye contact with Whitfield. Counselor, are you moving for my recusal? I'm saying that any objective observer would question your ability to be impartial in this matter. I see. And let me guess, you'd prefer a judge who's more understanding of your client's position? I'd prefer a judge who understands that the law serves society's interests and that sometimes those interests align with economic development. Judge Caprio nodded slowly as if considering this. The courtroom held its breath. Mr. Whitfield, I'm going to share something with you that I hope you'll remember for the rest of your legal career. The law doesn't serve society's interests. That's what legislatures do. The law serves justice. And justice doesn't care about economic development or political connections or how many jobs your client creates. That's naive, Your Honor. No, Counselor. That's integrity. And it's the difference between a lawyer and a mercenary. Whitfield's face flushed red. Your Honor, You can resent whatever you like, but you will do so with respect for this court. Now, do you have any actual legal arguments to present, or are we done here? For a long moment, Whitfield just stared at the judge. Then he made his final, fatal mistake. Fine. Let's talk about the law. Your Honor, you keep talking about evidence and facts, but the reality is that you have discretion in sentencing. Wide discretion. And if you choose to impose harsh penalties on my client, penalties that could bankrupt a company that employs hundreds of people, you'll have to answer for that. To the community, to the mayor, to the people who depend on those jobs. Is that another threat, Mr. Whitfield? It's a reality check. Your Honor, one phone call from my office, just one, and you'll be answering questions about whether you're fit to serve, questions about your judgment, questions about whether a judge your age should still be making decisions that affect people's livelihoods. The courtroom erupted. Even Whitfield's associate stood up, whispering urgently in his ear, but he brushed her away. Judge Caprio let the chaos continue for a moment before raising his hand. Instant silence. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried absolute authority. Mr. Whitfield, in 43 years on this bench, I've been threatened, bribed, pressured, and cajoled. Lawyers have questioned my judgment, my intelligence, and my fitness to serve. And yet somehow, I'm still here. Do you know why? Whitfield said nothing. Because the people who appoint judges, the real people, not the power brokers you're so fond of mentioning, they understand something you've forgotten. They understand that the moment a judge starts worrying about phone calls and consequences is the moment justice dies. Judge Caprio picked up his gavel, but he didn't strike it yet. You said one phone call from your office could end my career. Let me tell you what one phone call from my office can do. It can bring in the State Bar Association to investigate an attorney for attempting to intimidate a sitting judge. It can result in disciplinary proceedings. It can end a law license. Whitfield's eyes widened. Your Honor, you can't be serious. Oh, I'm very serious, but I'm also merciful. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to sit down. You're going to listen to Ms. Chen present her case. You're going to make your arguments based on law and evidence, actual law and actual evidence. And if you make one more comment about phone calls or connections or my age, I will hold you in contempt of court and refer you to the Bar Association for ethics violations. Am I making myself clear? Whitfield looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. His associate was frantically gathering papers, probably contemplating a career change. I said, am I making myself clear, Counselor? Yes, Your Honor. The words came out barely above a whisper. I can't hear you. Yes, Your Honor. Whitfield's voice was loud now, but the arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked a lot like fear. Good. Now sit down. Whitfield sat. His hands were shaking. Judge Caprio turned to the ADA. Ms. Chen, please proceed with your case. What followed was 3 hours of testimony, evidence, and expert witnesses. The city presented a devastating case. photographs of the collapsed sidewalk, medical records showing Mrs. Martinez's injuries, inspection reports documenting repeated safety violations, emails showing Castellano Development had been warned multiple times. Whitfield barely made any objections. When he did cross-examine witnesses, it was perfunctory, mechanical. The fight had gone out of him. Finally, Judge Caprio was ready to rule. Based on the evidence presented, I find Castellano Development Corporation guilty of all 16 charges. The evidence is overwhelming and frankly appalling. This company received multiple warnings, ignored multiple stop work orders, and operated with a flagrant disregard for public safety. Mrs. P. Martinez dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. As for sentencing, I'm imposing the maximum fine of $500,000. Additionally, Castellano Development is prohibited from obtaining any new building permits in Providence for a period of 2 years. All current projects will be subject to daily safety inspections at the company's expense. Whitfield stood up shakily. Your Honor, those penalties will what, Mr. Whitfield? Hurt your client's bottom line? Good. Maybe they'll remember that compliance is cheaper than negligence. Maybe they'll remember that the law applies to them. Your Honor, I'd like to request denied. This case is closed. Judge Caprio struck his gavel once, firmly. And Mr. Whitfield? I'll expect to see you in my chambers after we adjourn. We need to discuss your conduct today. Whitfield nodded miserably. As the courtroom began to clear, Judge Caprio called out, Mrs. Martinez, could you approach the bench, please? The elderly woman stood slowly, leaning heavily on her cane, and made her way forward. The bailiff helped her up the steps. Mrs. Martinez, Judge Caprio said gently, I want you to know that justice was served here today. Not because your opponent was powerful, but despite it. The law protected you, just as it's supposed to. Mrs. Martinez's voice was soft, accented with the Spanish of her childhood. Thank you, Judge Caprio. I was so scared. My daughter, she said maybe we shouldn't fight. Maybe the company was too big. But my granddaughter, she watches your videos on YouTube. She said, Abuela, Judge Caprio is fair. He will listen. So I came. Judge Caprio smiled, his eyes glistening. Your granddaughter is very wise. Tell her I said thank you for believing in the system. As Mrs. Martinez left, the ADA approached. Judge, I've never seen anything like that. Whitfield is one of the most powerful attorneys in the state. To stand up to him like that, Ms. Chen, can I tell you something? The most powerful attorneys are only powerful if we let them be. The moment we remember that the law is bigger than any one person, bigger than their money, their connections, their threats, that's when we take the power back. Will you really report him to the Bar Association? Judge Caprio considered this. That depends on our conversation in chambers. Everyone deserves a chance to make things right, even arrogant lawyers. 20 minutes later, in Judge Caprio's chambers, Marcus Whitfield sat across from the judge, his expensive suit rumpled, his confidence shattered. Your Honor, I want to apologize, sincerely. What I said in that courtroom was inexcusable. I got caught up in winning, in protecting my client at all costs. I forgot that there are lines you don't cross. Judge Caprio poured 2 glasses of water, sliding one across to Whitfield. Why do you think you forgot? Whitfield looked up, surprised by the question. I don't know. Maybe because I've been getting away with it for so long. Judges who were afraid of my clients. Opponents who settled rather than fight. Somewhere along the way, I started believing my own hype. Do you know what your problem is, Mr. Whitfield? You're a talented lawyer. You could be a great lawyer. But you chose to be a mercenary instead. I know that now. Do you? Judge Caprio leaned forward. Because here's what I want you to understand. When you threatened me in that courtroom, you weren't just disrespecting me. You were disrespecting every person who's ever trusted the legal system to protect them. You were telling Mrs. Martinez that her broken hip doesn't matter as much as your client's bank account. You were saying that justice is for sale. Whitfield's voice cracked. I'm so ashamed. Good. Shame is healthy. It means you still have a conscience. The question is, what are you going to do with it? I'll resign from this case. I'll apologize to Mrs. Martinez personally, and I'll accept whatever disciplinary action you think is appropriate. Judge Caprio studied him for a long moment. I'm not going to report you to the Bar Association. Not this time. Whitfield looked up, shocked. You're not? No, because I believe people can change. I believe that even the most arrogant lawyer can remember why he went to law school in the first place. But understand this. If I ever, and I mean ever, hear that you've pulled something like this again in any courtroom, I will personally make sure you never practice law again. Do we have an understanding? Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. Thank you. As Whitfield stood to leave, Judge Caprio added, And Marcus, go talk to Mrs. Martinez, not as a lawyer, as a human being. Hear her story. Maybe it'll remind you what this profession is supposed to be about. That evening, footage of the courtroom exchange appeared on YouTube. Someone had recorded it on their phone, and within hours, it had been viewed millions of times. The comments section exploded. Judge Caprio is a legend. That lawyer thought money could buy justice. Wrong. This is what integrity looks like. Every judge should watch this. The way Judge Caprio stood up for Mrs. Martinez, I'm not crying, you're crying. I've been a lawyer for 15 years, and this reminded me why I chose this profession. Thank you, Judge Caprio. News outlets picked up the story. Legal ethics professors used it as a teaching tool. Bar associations issued statements about the importance of judicial independence. But for Judge Caprio, it was just another Tuesday. Because for him, every case mattered. Every defendant, every plaintiff, every victim deserved the same respect, the same consideration, the same justice. 2 weeks later, Marcus Whitfield sent a letter to the court. In it, he announced he'd withdrawn from 3 other cases where he felt his approach had been ethically compromised. He'd also volunteered to do pro bono work for the Legal Aid Society. Judge Caprio kept that letter in his desk drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that the law, when practiced with integrity, really could change people. And Mrs. Martinez? She recovered fully from her injuries. The settlement money, which Castellano Development agreed to after the guilty verdict, paid for her medical bills and then some. But what she treasured most was the memory of the day a 78-year-old judge reminded a powerful attorney that in a courtroom, everyone stands equal before the law. If you believe in judges who stand up for what's right, no matter who's watching, hit that subscribe button and join the All Rise community. Because justice isn't about power or money. It's about people like Judge Caprio who remember every single day that the law exists to protect all of us. Drop a comment below. Have you ever witnessed justice being served against all odds? Share your story.